I think developers get in trouble when they let the money dictate what they build as opposed to building what is wanted and needed and then finding a way to make the numbers work.
Hello, and welcome to Real Talk, where we have real talk with the real people in real estate. And today's guest has worked in real estate for over 40 years. He's been part of big companies like JLL, Lehman Brothers, leading major projects across the country. But at one point, his life took a turn. He left the corporate world and started his own company, which is called Harrington Brown, a place where every project has real meaning. Now, he focuses on building places that help people bring joy and still make business sense. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks very much, Hisham. Good to be here.
Great. David, I have read the official bios, the LinkedIn lines, and even saw that you helped your nephew with project in West Virginia. If I walked into one of your projects and asked someone there who David Brown is, what do you hope they'd say about you?
Oh boy. Well, I hope they would say that I'm a good person, energetic and optimistic and full of energy and just love making connections with people for myself. And I get a lot of joy out of seeing other people in our projects make connections with others as well. So I think that, they also would say that, I'm thinking of Ravenswood Work Center right now as one of the places most recently I've been involved with, and would say that the tenants find that as an enjoyable place to come to work. And they'll see me a lot of times there trying to put together, people with other people or make some introductions or make sure people are doing okay.
So, David, if real estate hadn't happened, what do you think you'd be doing today? And do you think you'd still be building in some way?
So I think I would say that the concept of building is something that I think everybody does, whether they realize it or not. We all need to build things either for our families or communities, and that's really what our society, depends upon for survivals. But thinking back on my career, and if it wasn't real estate, I think back as a teenager, and I thought that I had narrowed it down to two options, which was one was a pastor and the other was a professional bowler. So I knew for sure it was going to be one of those two things. And when those didn't pan out, then I started thinking, as I got into later in high school into college, I thought, something like, again, back to the concept of building, like loving cities and loving building things and bringing people together. I thought, how cool would it be to be a city manager or a mayor of a mid-sized Midwestern city. So, I thought, government, politics, law, but it all got back to my, passion or enjoyment about seeing things built. I wasn't sure I was going to be the one to build them or not, but, always liked the idea of people, either me or others creating things.
Love it. So, you have worked with big firms like Oryx, JLL, and Lehman Brothers. What do you believe you learned there that gave you the edge to go out on your own later?
I think I learned something every day that I went into work at all of those places. Again, mostly large companies, and that's back when people actually went into the office to work. We were a lot of young people working hard, working long hours, and playing hard as well. So I got my career started in New York City and was there for 10 years. And I can't imagine today starting my career working remotely, because the learning that I got from whatever the job was, whether it was a research analyst at Jones Lang Wooten or working on international global real estate investment with Lehman Brothers, always fed so much energy off of the people around me and in the office and just casually in the hallway or at post-work get-togethers. I learned how to put together teams of people. I learned, I think, to listen and to understand that everyone's bringing something different to the table or to a team, and how to get the most out of a team while still also knowing that I've got to bring my own A game every day. And the thing that I would say also is that I guess I learned from my managers how to allow others around you to learn as well. So that whole mentor-mentee relationship and leadership, I was well served by tons of great bosses, but even the bad bosses gave me something to learn. And, you learn certain lessons of what not to do as well. But I would say that, starting from the very beginning, the basics of learning value in real estate was probably the most impactful thing that I ever learned from any of those jobs.
You're right. I mean, you learn more from, I think, from bad bosses. They get to teach you a lot.
Yeah, I hope and I'm sure some people might say they learned a lot from me because I was a bad boss at times or made some bad decisions at times, but I also was probably, tried to be as aware as I could of what people really needed in terms of, as a peer and a colleague, but also, as my career advanced and I became the leader of the companies, hopefully people could learn from me in giving them those opportunities.
So, what first pulled you into real estate? Was it strategic, or did life just led you there?
I had no idea that real estate would be something I would end up in. I had no interest in real estate per se, despite what I said before about wanting to build things and being, very involved in cities. My degree was in urban studies at Northwestern, and then I went to the Kennedy School at Harvard for you know, public policy, a master's in public policy, community, urban development. Never thought that that would lead me to real estate or even give me the background to make a career in real estate. I always thought it would be in some type of nonprofit or government entity, and I thought that's where you would make the most impact. So I happened to see, in a hallway back when postings were actually on paper, posted on a bulletin board in grad school for this international real estate company called Jones Lang Wooten. Didn't know anything about it. Didn't really know much about the real estate industry at all, other than seeing things built and signs for leasing and for sale and the residential, real estate as well. But it intrigued me. I had a conversation with them and they really drew me in with a great opportunity to start my job in a way that was, spoke to my strengths at the time, at least, which was market research and analytics and statistics and, really loving to learn about new cities. And so my first job was, in research for Jones Lang Wooten. And at the age of 23, I went to New York City. I didn't know anybody and started writing reports on the Houston apartment market or the impact of the oil industry on the Houston office market, and then was given opportunities to do that same discipline around market research and look at comparing the Paris office market with the Sydney, Australia office market. And people gave me these great opportunities to just go and do my own research and do my own work and come up with my own ideas and analytical models and whatnot. And it was just a great start.
Amazing. So, tell us about your first project. What went right, and what do you do differently now?
Okay, starting in real estate, I look back on it now, and again, I was in research, and I was asked to do all of the analytic research on markets around the globe. And my bosses had developed this concept or theory that there's good portfolio investment diversification benefits by assembling a portfolio of mixed assets by property type, but also mixed locations and not just diversification in the US, but looking at global markets. So I didn't know it at the time, but I was asked to, again, analyze the London office market as well as Paris and Sydney and New York and San Francisco and Tokyo, and put together at the time, which was quite a sophisticated model that working with my boss, we were allowed to, a lot of room to put together this analysis. And we put together the very first global real estate investment program about 40 years ago. And it was a venture between Jones Lang Wooten and Prudential Insurance Company that involved investors from around the world making investments in other markets around the world as well. So that was just great experience, great exposure. People trusted me. And, things that went wrong, I would say the thing that went wrong was the whole theory of international diversification came crashing down when there was a global recession that happened in 1990 and 91, that you can't model those things, and it affected all financial markets around the world equally.
Right. Who gave you the first real shot? Someone who believed in you or gave you more responsibility than you thought you were ready for?
Right. Yeah. I'll probably get a little choked up now, but I would, other than my parents and my grade school teachers, which always, for some reason just, thought I could do great things and wanted me to do great things. And whether it was as a 7-year-old or throughout school, that was great because that's just so helpful to build a sense of confidence. And then also a sense for me was to always challenge myself to do more. If people are supporting me and think I can do a good job, I want more challenges. So, but aside from that, I would say that, giving me my first shot, if I think making that first entree into the commercial real estate industry would be my first boss, Helen Arnold, who headed up research for Jones Lang Wooten. And again, I was coming at real estate from, this public policy background, this market research background. They thought I was a good writer. And I also combined that with what I thought was pretty sophisticated financial analysis. I could really work my way around a Lotus 123 spreadsheet and print out the analysis on a large dot matrix printer. So that was the technology at the time. And an HP 12C calculator. So they thought I was the whiz kid, even though the technology compared to today was nothing. And they gave me room to grow, room to use new tools, things that I thought could help them in pitching to clients around the world. So that was Helen Arnold. And then I would say what I always wanted to do was I was always curious, and I would advise anyone starting out in the industry now is just be as curious as you possibly can. Raise your hand whenever there's an opportunity to be on a team of a new assignment. So even though I was in research, I didn't stay in my locked office and writing out reports and cranking out numbers in the hallways. Got to meet people in meetings. I was invited to meetings. Dennis Kavanaugh was the head of the corporate real estate group at Jones Lang Wooten at the time, and he gave me this great opportunity to work on the global investment program, work on some Manhattan leasing deals, and again, taking a risk by having me as a young, inexperienced kid be part of the team and bringing me into those meetings. And then Frank J. Sullivan is another guy who's kind of a legend in our industry. He ran the investment group at Jones Lang Wooten. The best thing that he showed me was that, you know, at a time, I think most people look at the real estate industry and commercial real estate industry as, it can be a rough and tumble industry in Manhattan specifically. There have been some famous people that have come out of the real estate industry in New York that we all know about. Frank Sullivan was one of those guys that taught me you can be a nice guy, you can be a smart guy, you can be a fun guy, you can be a father figure and a mentor, and be very successful in this industry, not always at the expense of taking someone else down. So that's what Frank.
Great. I mean, that's what I was about to ask you. Like, what advice did someone give you early in your career that still holds true today?
Yeah, I think the advice was, early on was just, I'm an energetic, hardworking guy, and I'm, impatient, and I always want to go on to the next thing. Always want to learn more. And I would say that the advice people gave me, early on was, yeah, be hard charging and be aggressive and be ready to take on new assignments, but have this kind of, um, don't know that you're in it for the long term and the opportunities will come. And if you are prepared and you do your work, then you'll put yourself in a good position to be, I would say, to be lucky. And that was one of the things that I learned early on, both in my personal life as well as in the career, is that working hard and being smart and knowing what you know about the industry really can only just put you in a position to benefit by getting lucky.
You said you only take on projects that are fun and meaningful. What or when did that become your rule? And what made you realize you need to make that shift?
Yeah, clearly, at my stage in the stage I'm in my career now, and being on my own and having my own company, I will be the first to admit the successes that I had in the corporate world and, have put me in a position to be able to be picky about the projects that I work on. So, not everyone has that luxury, but I would also say to people, just it will come. You will be able to be, to pick and choose the assignments that you want to work on. And, kind of getting back to building your question about that, I worked at great big companies and we did some really important assignments that, helped other people build. We were advising people on developing projects, on raising money, on investing money. And I was very proud of the work that I got to do, but it wasn't my own. I wasn't the one building it. And so when I have been given this opportunity on my own to be the one to build it, and I couldn't do it without all that experience and the jobs that I had in the corporate world. When you see the impact that a project can have, other projects, let's say good or bad, you realize it's kind of, I think it's easy to do projects that have real meaning. And that's why I'm doing it in the first place. We make decisions about building things in real estate that are 200-year decisions. They're long-term impact. So you can't just do something that meets the market today. And, it's a great feeling to know that you do have the ability to create some things that are going to be around long after you are. So yeah, I have fun. It gives me being in real estate and doing it the way I do it, has given me plenty of opportunities to listen to people, whether it's a nonprofit or a community organization or my church or a kid's school, that when there's a real estate component to being able to help, I jump right in. And that's, makes me feel like I'm helping in ways that maybe others are not able to. Now, my nephew, a couple months ago when he called me and said, "Hey, can you help me look at this real estate deal?" I get to see my nephew on every other Thanksgiving or Easter, and we stay in touch and I hear what he's up to, but it's, he's on, on the East Coast. I'm here in Chicago. So I thought, I'd love to help you. And just so you know, I'm not looking to make any money on this. I don't want to be part of the deal. Let me just, fly out and share with you my thoughts. And it's so great to be able to do that.
And yeah, when we last spoke, you were on a trip to set things for your nephew. I remember.
Yeah.
So, David, in 2008, after a cancer diagnosis, you left the corporate world and started Harrington Brown. What gave you that courage to walk away and do your own thing?
Well, I didn't have the courage to walk away and do my own thing. I never did. And most people don't. And it's understandable. If you have a great job, people are paying you, you're with a lot of, you're enjoying. I love my jobs. I love my jobs that I had. And when I was at Oryx, I was given an opportunity to be CEO of a company that had a long history in Chicago. It was, at that time, it was a subsidiary of a Japanese company, but it was really the successor company to the Arthur Rubloff company, which is one of Chicago's, all-time great developers. And again, they're paying me. I'm working well. I'm working with some great people. I loved it. I never would have had the courage to leave that to start my own thing, even though starting my own thing and doing my own thing is something I knew I would enjoy. But no, I did not have the courage to do it. And I got diagnosed with cancer. And so that was a bad day. My kids were two daughters. They were 2 and 3 at the time. And, you think it's a horrible luck that I was given to, I got sick and they told me I was going to die in 14 months. And, it's kind of whack. And I wouldn't say it was not an epiphany that changed the way I viewed life. I think I always viewed life in a certain way. But what it changed was, I worked through chemo, worked my butt off as CEO still. The market started crashing around us in '08, right at the same time I got sick. And through chemo, I'm on my BlackBerry, working as much as I can. But in the end, I did not get a clean bill of health through it all. So I had to leave the company. So it was not my choice. It was not my courage. It was not this grand plan that I had. It was just being on one path. And then all of a sudden, that's changed forever. And so, yeah, it was pretty bad, but I look back on it and that's the best thing that ever happened to me. So I look at this and when I tell people, without wanting to get into the whole cancer talk, I say something like I was given the opportunity to go out on my own or something like that. Usually it means you were fired or laid off or something. But for me, I got cancer and I took a year and a half to get healthy. And the day I got into remission, 18 months later, after working in my pajamas, doing some volunteer work for some projects that I could do, the day I got into remission in Washington, D.C. at NIH, I flew home, set up an LLC, picked a name, rented office space the next day, didn't know what. I decided to call it Harrington Brown. And this is a secret that only people watching this will know. Harrington is my grandfather's middle name. And so there really is no Harrington involved in the business. It's just me. So I picked the name, didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something and just started reaching out to people who were just as gracious and caring as you can imagine. And just started from there looking at deals and deciding that I was given this great opportunity through my career to do work throughout the world, all over the US. And then I got, several assignments and worked with people in Asia and Europe and decided that once had this opportunity to go on my own, I was going to narrow my focus to a 3-mile radius from my home, really just focus on projects in the community. I worked from home initially around with my kids. And again, best thing that ever happened to me, but it wasn't my choice, but I made the best of it.
I mean, that's why they say like everything happens for a good reason. And things that happened in your life, it led you to a big decision that you had to take and here you are. I mean, that was the best thing that happened to you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, Anyway, I look back on that with such gratitude. I think I'm a strong person, and I think you need to be to get through that. But that I learned a lot from that, and try to apply it every day right now.
Right. I mean, that's what matters. I mean, you can learn it from things. So, what was the first project under Harrington Brown, and how was it different from what you were doing before?
All right. So back in '08, at the end of '08, I I left the corporate world. I'm on my own, and I was fortunate to build up a 401k with the company, or it actually was a deferred comp plan, and had to take it out of the company. And again, keep in mind, I was given a diagnosis that said I would not, 90% chance of dying in 14 months. That's what all the experts said. But I decided to go through chemo anyway. And as I'm doing that, I took this money that I was fortunate enough to, set aside through this work compensation plan. And I had always told myself, this is the benefit of the gray hair and being around a lot of different cycles. I'd seen cycles before. And I always said, whenever there's a combination of the next major down cycle, and I actually have some money, I want to buy urban infill land. I'd seen it work time and time again, whether it was the financial crisis of '87. There was a recession in 1991. There was another crisis, financial crisis in '97. There was 9/11. All these times that the market goes down and real estate is hit really hard. Land, I always tell people that the value of land can go to zero pretty quickly. And so I had this money. I had one of the worst times in the market ever. I didn't know if I was going to be around. So I took my money and I bought this piece of land where I am sitting right now, urban infill land that is at the corner of Montrose and Honore Street next to a transit station out my window, and just sat on it. Didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it. And this gets to the point of everyone has these grand plans about what they want to do. And I mean, I might have had a plan A and a plan B to build a little building and do something, but I didn't know. And it was just a good value real estate. So that was the first deal that I did. I bought that land, and it wasn't income generating. It was just a piece of land. And I had some people in the community come to me and say, hey, yeah, I'd been on the neighborhood association, for a number of years as well. And they wanted us to do a community garden. And they'd gone around talking to all kinds of developers in the neighborhood, and no one would allow them to do that because either their lender wouldn't approve it or their insurance wouldn't approve it. And they came to me and had coffee with them. And within probably 20 minutes, I said, let's do it. And so my land wasn't going to use on anything. It was a crappy time in the market, and I had the benefit of not having a lender breathing down my neck. So worked with a neighborhood organization, the North Center Neighbors Association, and also a woman who had started a nonprofit doing community gardens. And we built out this site. It's about a 13,000 square foot site. We put in 150 raised bed gardens for the community, for the local politicians, for the local restaurants, the breweries. And my conditions were to let everybody know that, this will not be a garden forever. We can do it for a couple of years, but if the market improves, don't turn me into the bad guy who then builds a building, because I'm the same guy that is doing the garden with you. And I wanted to have some of the garden plots, the produce that was grown there, donated to the food pantry in the neighborhood. Common Pantry is the oldest continually operating food pantry in the city of Chicago. I was on the board and wanted to be able to give something back there. And then I wanted restaurants and breweries to grow things in the garden as well. So this was just done to have fun, to work with great people, be part of the community, feel like you're giving back. But when I look back now on, people talk about placemaking and strategies for, activating space. That's what I was doing. I didn't know it, but that's what I was doing. So people then knew Montrose Green. They knew this location. They knew it was going to be something someday. And I just loved it. I had a ton of fun with it. We did Christmas tree recycling. We did an Irish Christmas market. And then as the market improved, then we got busy designing a building, and it coincided with the time that the city of Chicago implemented a new transit-oriented development ordinance. So we were one of the first transit-oriented developments in the city of Chicago, and had the benefit of being able to, redesign what we thought we were going to build. And now, we built 38 apartments, 5,000 square feet of retail on the ground floor, which is now was a Culver's, and did it with 20% affordable housing on site as well. So great fun project. I loved every minute of it. It was the first one under Harrington Brown, and one that's very special to me.
I mean, you did an amazing job. So you blend community work, nonprofit housing, and private capital. What's the real trick to making a project both meaningful?
Well, yeah. So I'm not a nonprofit, but I would say the trick to making something both meaningful and profitable is focus on the meaning first. And if you focus on the meaning first, the profit will be there. And I think people get caught up too much about the money side of it and what I can build and what I can't do. And if you just stay at it, if you are a good listener to the people in the community, know what it is that they really want or really need. And it's not about you saying, I need this in order for my project to be profitable. It's what do you need for this to be a meaningful project? And then we go back and we can run the numbers. We can look at, complicated financial structures, ways to make it work. But this project, I remember, I love working on projects that people say can't get done or can't be successful. And that's a good motivator for me. So, there was a graduate school here in Chicago that asked me to do a case study for their class and allow them to come and work with me for some time, look at the site, analyze the numbers, look at my plans. Again, it was a piece of dirt at the time. So they all did their sophisticated analysis and then had me come down for their presentations. And it's like four different teams looking at four different scenarios, try to help me out. And I have this screen saved that I look at quite a bit. And, one of the teams, their conclusion put up this slide and it said, this project on Montrose in Chicago is unfeasible as planned. And I love it because, yeah, if you just look at just the numbers from some perspectives, there's no way we could have done 20% affordable housing on site, retail, apartments, my office, and made the numbers work. But we just stayed at it. And, the other thing I would say was didn't build it for today. We said, we're going to build it when the time is right. So we got the benefit of the market improving. We were able to sign leases at higher rents. Market rents kept growing. So, we benefited from that. But all along, we positioned ourselves, and I say we and ourselves, but I have no employees, but we positioned ourselves with all of these ideas to be able to execute on if and when the time came. And that's kind of what happened.
Right. Do you think too many developers focus on rent and location and not enough on long-term community impact?
I would say location is always the most important. I mean, it really is. It goes without saying that the classic, which I won't repeat, but location is important. Yeah, I think too many developers make the mistake of starting with the money. Where's the money coming from? Who are the equity investors? What are they looking for? What kind of returns are they looking for? Who are the lenders? How will they lend? How will they finance it? Can we get mezzanine financing or can we structure it differently? And how much money am I going to make on this project? And I think that's where too many people start. And I like to start with the location and what it could be and what it should be, and then find a way to make it work. And again, it doesn't, not I have the luxury of this because of the way I've been able to put some deals together, but not every deal needs to be built now. The market may not want you to, if I wanted to build apartments on this site and some retail, and I owned the site in '09 and 2010 and 11, it was not feasible. So, I had to wait it out. We had to make some changes. And so, yeah, I think developers get in trouble when they let the money dictate what they build as opposed to building what is wanted and needed and then finding a way to make the numbers work.
So what's usually the hardest part of a project for you? Is it entitlements, financing, timing, politics, or something else?
Let's see, the hardest part of the project. The way I look at deals now, and again, I think, hardest part for me is if I have to explain everything that's going on inside my head to somebody else. And because I have a vision for a project or a property, and I think I can articulate things pretty well, but sometimes, you have a crazy idea or I'm told that, to trust your instinct. So I can trust my instinct on a project and I can feel good about a location or a property or a project and just know it's going to be a good project. But that's no way to, you can't put that in a business plan. So I'm not out raising money. I'm not out looking for partners to convince them to buy into my deal. I'm looking at putting deals together, making sense of them, and then worrying about the money. And if you are raising money, clearly you have to have a pro forma, you have to have an idea, you have to have something that pencils out for somebody else to get involved. But some of my projects, the most successful ones have just been I had a plan A and a plan B, but well, thank God I had a plan C, D, E, F, and G. And had to react or put those plans together, when the time came, when either the markets changed or a tenant blew out or failed or zoning, changed their mind. And, we have to bob and weave. But, if you have optionality is the key. You have plenty of different options to execute on a successful project. And again, it gets back to if it's well located in a good community and you're ready to give the community what they want and what they need, it'll make sense.
Great. So tell me about a project that looked great on paper, but it turned out to be really tough. And what went wrong and what did it teach
Well, I would, I would say looking back at projects, I save everything. I'm a paper guy and I save my handwritten notes. I save the analyses that I did. And so it's always good to look back and say, I bought this property and this is what my plan A was, and realize that what happened was completely different. And some of that is because other opportunities come your way. And other times it's because you've failed, you were wrong. And I'm a big believer in just admitting when you make a mistake and when you're wrong. And if you have the ability to dust yourself off and look at those other options, I've had one big mistake that I had, and it didn't turn out to be, but at one point it was one of the bigger mistakes in my career since I've been on my own was in Evanston, Illinois, crappy site right on the border of Evanston across from Chicago that the city of Evanston had troubles with derelict owners, delinquent property taxes. It was just a horrible site. They wanted someone to develop it for years and they couldn't convince anybody to develop it. Well, I was the lucky guy that got introduced to the site by a tenant who thought her was a nonprofit. It was the garden person that, a great friend of mine had an idea for making a garden center, do a little bit of nonprofit, a little bit of event space, and really create this place in a for-profit way in Evanston. So I bought the land. I went to the city and said, what do you want? And they told me what they wanted. I said, we can work with you. We have this tenant that's going to be great. We're going to build some apartments. And then the tenant couldn't get financing for her business. And that was, if I go back on the spreadsheet, that was, the majority of the success of the project was contingent upon the success of that ground floor tenant. That was really what we were building around. So they blew out. The zoning clock is still ticking. I only had months left. COVID hits, and I'm stuck with a piece of land that I'd already done environmental cleanup on. So I just kept investing money, environmental cleanup, revised plans with architects, go back to the city. The zoning clock is running out. I had to go back. But every time I walked into this, that was horrible. That's a piece where the land value went down to zero. And I was stuck, I was holding it and the land was zero. And so I had some pretty desperate situation at times, but I kind of stuck at it, went back to the city, said, okay, we have to change plans here. What do you think? And it was really a collaborative effort. So I do call it a public-private partnership. They did have some TIF funds, tax increment financing funds available, worked very well with the city staff, with the aldermen, and had to go out and redesign it. And had to scramble a little bit financially, but eventually we put together a new plan. I brought in another developer, recapitalized the project, and got it built, got a new tenant on the ground floor, and very successful project. And everyone in Evanston seems to be very happy with it. Delivered 28 apartments. Again, I insisted on 20% affordable housing on site, great retailer with an amenity for coffee shop and bakery, as well as a cannabis dispensary, which I had mixed emotions on that, but that's what the city wanted. The city has a fund for, um, you know, extra tax on cannabis dispensaries, so they wanted that, and that worked out great. So this is one that was, a roller coaster up and down. So when people look at developers and say, "Oh man, that guy easy money," it's not easy money. You buy a piece of land, it may be great value one day, and it can go to zero the next, and you just have to, hopefully you're fortunate to not be foreclosed on with a lender and dig yourself out, literally.
before your project is even leased? What do you focus on most to set it up for success?
Yeah, I would say that, a lot of developers and owners, we all think that we can control things and we can't. And so when you come up with a project, you think, I'm going to have, and the communities are this way sometimes. And when they tell you what they want, this is a great project. We're going to have a coffee shop. We're going to have a boutique. We're going to have a local business. We're going to have an art gallery, things that the community wants. And this is what we're going to have. And so you set the stage for your pro formas built on that. And then in reality, you don't control any of that. And so you have to rely on the location. You have to rely on the design. I think I work with a good friend of mine, Mike Wilkinson, who's with Level Architecture. And, I happen to like his design. People like his design in the community. And we spend the extra money on good design, and that will attract tenants because people are always looking for something that's, new and functional. So, pre-leasing, again, I had that project in Evanston. I had it pre-leased. I had the idea with it was going to be great, and then that didn't happen. So we had to shift. So I don't get too hung up on this is going to be for this tenant or this tenant or this tenant. Pick a good location, good property. I bought Ravenswood Work Center 4 years ago here on the north side of Chicago. Big, ugly industrial building, was kind of crumbling, falling apart. And I just fell in love with it because it's in my neighborhood. It's within my 3-mile radius that I like. I know people that want space around here, whether it's friends or community organizations or other people that I know. And this building had 35-foot high, clear ceilings, big drive-in dock. And at the time, there was all of this, last mile distribution, kind of this mix of warehousing and retail, and no one really could figure out what the building was going to be. And I figured it out. I thought it's going to be great for manufacturing or warehouse and distribution, and I bought it with that pro forma. And got a call, a month after I bought it from a guy who really wanted the 35-foot clear height to build a live soundstage. Now, I had no idea there was such a use for that. I got lucky, but the building itself was a great location, had some unique features, and it just ended up being, the demand was, met by somebody different than what I thought. So, I love that project. It has 20,000 square feet below grade. You can drive a van in through a drive-in dock door, and then a ramp down to 20,000 square feet with no windows. So we chopped it up into small spaces and not knowing who would lease it. So you could say, I want a carpenter, or I want a warehouse guy, or these guys are in high demand now, but you never know. So to give you an idea, my tenants there, a guy who makes plastic mustaches to attach to musical instruments. I have a guy that makes ultraviolet fixtures to sterilize doctors' offices and hospitals. We have a guy that makes signs. We have a guy that makes high-end pool cues with gold and diamond inlay and sells for very high prices. So you never know. And if you have a good location, good product, good design, and make it easy for the tenants. We took what was a 30-page lease with pass-throughs and pro rata share operating expenses, and we cut that down to a 4-page lease. If you're interested in leasing space, we don't even quote things on price per square foot or percentage share of CAM. It's $900 a month, and this is your rent. This is what you get, and we're happy to have you, and that's part of our community. So you never know.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking. How early do you start thinking about tennis mix, or how do you decide which would be the right tenant to
Well, yeah,
give out to?
yeah. I mean, you have to think about who could be the mix and is there demand for it from certain people, right? And you have to look at what your comps are and who's in the neighborhood and everything, and try to deliver it for that. But again, reality is you never know. By the time you either build something, the market may change. There may be new types of tenants. This warehouse that I bought, Ravenswood Work Center, 2 years into it, I started getting calls from pickleball people. I just heard of pickleball, and they wanted this 35-foot clear height. Can you fit in 4 pickleball courts? Who would have guessed that you can get lucky by leasing space to a pickleball court? I didn't. Someone else did on other projects, but you never know what's coming next.
You're right. I agree with you. So
And that's why, kind of getting back to the point of when we're building things, we're not building for today. We're building for 200 years, or maybe 100 or 200 years from now. So you have to build a good product, good location that is going to be that for the long term. You build a property and a Starbucks is going to be there. 20 years from now, Starbucks may not be there. It might be something else, something we don't even know yet. But if it's a good location, you can, I love adaptive reuse. And I wouldn't think today that, there's a need for an adaptive reuse of a Starbucks, but we're doing adaptive reuse of old manufacturing because something else is taking its place. For good news for Ravenswood Work Center is it's new types of manufacturing and assembly, so we're not getting rid of it. So we still have jobs in the community.
Real estate is all about teams. How do you decide which general contractors or vendors to work?
Yeah. Again, real estate can be a tough, nasty business, kind of cutthroat. And I think going into it with the sense that, that, most people are really, people have different motivations. Let's put it that way. So when it comes time to building a team, I'm pretty cautious about, really getting to know who is the person behind making the decisions. And, whether it's the architect or the general contractor or a designer or a partner or a lender, even, um, I view all of those as partners in a project. And most important thing to me is is communication. That sounds trite, I know, but what I mean by it is, do you understand what my goals are in the project? And like I said before, sometimes I can articulate that, sometimes I can't, but I'll do my best when I'm bringing somebody on the team because it's important we have our interests aligned. And then do they understand how we should be communicating when there is a problem? There's always going to be a problem. There's going to be something that goes sideways that we have to change. So I like to know that those people have a good understanding of that. And then when it gets to the numbers and you've got to negotiate, put out something out to bid for, 3 bids. I'm not always looking for the lowest bidder, but I'm looking for how someone bids and what's included, what's not. Are they willing to be a little bit more open book with me because they are going to be part of the team? And, I may pick the highest bidder on something. And that's true for lenders for me these days. If I am going to use a lender, I may talk to three, four, five lenders on a project. And when I was at Lehman Brothers and Oryx and others, it was all about the guy, winning the business by cutting it by 5 basis points on the rate or working something a little bit more on better amortization terms. What I look for in a lender is there the person that's going to be there when you need them, when you need to make a draw, when you need to change something, when a tenant changes or the numbers change? Are they going to be there when you need something? Are they going to be the one you're talking to through approvals? And so recent, examples here in Chicago, I would say I go out to look at lenders and some guys are coming at the lowest rate and I could go with them, but I wouldn't have the person to pick up the phone. So I'll put a plug in here. I use Albany Bank, and Mike McKee and Mike Chip at Albany Bank are great because they're down the block. They know the market, they know the real estate, they know me, and we can get things approved quickly or not approved quickly, one way or the other. So that's very, very important. And that goes for general contractors, architects, lawyers as well. I'm happy to pay a higher per hour rate for a lawyer that I know is going to be part of my team and understand a little bit of my quirkiness and how I do things.
Great. So, do general contractors usually approach you, or are you the one scouting? And how does relationship typically begin?
Yeah, I mean, you're always getting approached by service providers. I used to get approached all the time when I ran big companies and we were putting out a lot of business. When I went out on my own, people quickly realized that I may not be the great source of a ton of business anymore. But so I would say this day, I'm the one reaching out to contractors and service providers. And I want them to be able to tell me, no, the project's not right for them for certain reasons. And I completely respect that. But, have a core group of people that I work with that I know are honest both in terms of saying they can't do it or it's going to cost this. And trust me, I can't do it for any less because I love to negotiate and they know that. So usually, we can always get something for a little bit either cheaper or different types of terms or work out some kind of deal. But, I like people that I know I can trust to even tell me, sorry, this is what it is.
So, David, even after 40 years, what's one part of your job that still frustrates you? Something that just doesn't get easier?
I think, a lot of my job frustrates me, but I love and it's stress, it's anxiety. Yeah, I'm a guy that, everyone likes to control things. And in this business, again, we think we can control things. And that's not the case at all. So, that does turn into a frustration, but it's something I know. I would say, keeping up with some of the filing in my office and the administration, working at big companies, I had a lot of that support. I don't have an IT guy, I don't have a secretary or an admin, to do that stuff. And So I don't love doing that, but you need to stay organized. And I would say that frustrating part of my job is when I see people getting into the industry or interacting with me that I think just have a different approach to real estate. And, I have time for a lot of people and love, connecting with people. But if certain people don't have the certain kind of the fundamental approach around, ethics and what's really your motivator and honesty and, wanting to, take a shot at doing good things, I don't have a lot of patience for that, I guess.
So, if you could hand off one task permanently and never have to deal with it again, what would it be?
I'll go back. I'll say file all of my paperwork. I'm an old school guy. I still have let's see here. Still have a Rolodex. No one knows what a Rolodex is anymore, but I'm a paper guy. I've got paper files. I know how to work a computer and Dropbox and everything. And I know where things are, but having an admin to really keep it straight, I think is key. And that would be one task I would like to hand off. When you ask what people would say about me, and I think that there are plenty of people out there that would kind of roll their eyes at times and say, "Oh gosh, um, uh, you know, David thinks he can do anything." And this is coming from good friends of mine who are my lawyers, my accountant, my architects, leasing guys. And I joke with them about that I know a little bit about what they do and I rely on their professionalism and their support, but I also really love knowing real estate from all of the different perspectives. And so sometimes that does come across as, I can pretend to be a lawyer or know certain legal clauses, or my architects always jokes that I'm going to sketch up something first. I'm not an architect, but I have some ideas around how things might be designed, and I like collaborating with my architect there. And so about handing tasks off, I've never been, a great delegator. I like to get my hands dirty on every aspect of it, and that can be challenging sometimes for others that are part of my team. I think I've gotten better at it a little bit over the years, but other times I don't apologize for it. I just say that's who I am. I need to be involved in a lot of the details. I think it's very important for when deals go sideways, it could be because of a legal issue or it could be because of a design issue. And if I'm just that developer guy that takes the big picture, and says, "Hey, I didn't do it. That's my architect or that was my lawyer." I really want to know how to work yourself out of a problem.
Right. So, David, as AI is here and technology has been so advanced now, so have you ever thought of like handing over your reporting or inspections or communication? Have you wished or you wanted to for AI to do it for you if that could be done?
Yeah, no, that's hard no. And again, I'm an old school guy that I didn't think the internet was going to make it either. So I embraced that a little bit late. And when I even think back for voicemail, what do we need voicemail for? Secretaries are there to write our messages, and so I always, I adopt technology, but it's usually about 10 years late. So AI, I don't deny that it already is changing the world, it's changing the industry, and we need to be ready for that. I would say I dabble around a little bit. I joke with my daughters sometimes if one's a writer and a poet, and I'll use Chat GPT to write a poem for her on her birthday or something like that, and she knows right away it's Chat GPT. So at this point, I'm really just playing around with things. I think if you look at it as a more advanced and refined Google search, then I think that's the way I would use it. And maybe, right now using, Chat GPT to, write something about a market. I mean, I think there are going to be jobs that are eliminated with AI, unfortunately, but there's always a need for a person who can, do the real thinking or be creative. And I guess the creative thing for people to think about going forward, it's beyond me, but, acknowledge that AI is here to stay, and how can young people maybe change their job to embrace AI, use it, and make their jobs better, as opposed to just saying, throwing up their hands and saying my job's going to be eliminated, embrace it and be a better worker for it.
True. I mean, that's what they say. Like AI is not going to replace people's job. AI is going to replace people who don't know how to use AI. So you got to learn how to use it. How it works, Great. So, what's your take on smart technology, things like automated parking, smart locks, or energy systems or lighting? Are you seeing some demand for this from tenants and cities?
Yeah, clearly. And again, I'm an old school guy. Adopt new technologies about 10 years after they're introduced. I need to make sure that they're really going to work. But yeah, we're seeing that technology all over the place. I would say I'm not one of those guys that really knows, the ins and outs of how it works. And that's something where I will, rely on, the experts clearly to say, in a building, you want this type of, smart locks or remote locks or cameras or apps and whatnot. Early in my career, I was an asset manager for a group of hotels for an institutional property owner. And I remember going to one annual budget meeting, and the hotel general manager had in the budget an upgrade by getting rid of metal keys, and he wanted to do something new, which was use key cards for these electronic doors. And I said, no way. I said, people aren't ready for that. People want a key. Put the key in the door, turn it, get into your hotel room, and who knows about security. So I said no. And uh, at least for 2 years. 2 years later, we had the card keys. Again, for me, it takes me a while to know that it's for real, but I think people are doing amazing things. I'm a big believer in, you can always learn something from anybody. And usually people say, as a someone getting involved in the industry, to start learn from the older people, the experienced people, mentor mentee relationship. I'm also a big believer in, maybe more recently, in me and others my age learning from the young people, and always being open to whether it's just about behaviors or attitudes or technology. What is how can this experience be better for you? Make sure we don't design things for just today, but how are we designing things for the younger people that are going to be in the building, or the tenants, or the future owners as well. So I love that I can learn from my daughters now, and they also love that too.
Yeah, who wouldn't love that? So, you have helped. Yeah. So, you have helped launch and guide so many community-focused projects. When you look back, what do you want your work to say about you?
I'll probably get choked up here again. So this again, it kind of all gets back to building, right? And this great start to my career I had for probably the first 20 years working for big companies, running the numbers, making the presentation, advising others to do things was great. The great projects, things I'm really proud of. But I wasn't the one building, I wasn't the one taking the risk and creating things. And when I was diagnosed with cancer in '08 and told I was not going to survive, I kind of fast tracked a little bit of the whole mortality or legacy thinking. So when I bought this piece of land here in Chicago, this urban infill land, that's what it was all about. It was all about, what can I do with something today that when I'm gone, people might enjoy and say, "Ah, they did a really good job with that," or "I'm so glad that was built," or "How did that happen?" And maybe people will know the story of this project that that I shared earlier. Um, and when people look at Common Pantry in the neighborhood, Chicago's oldest food pantry, and they see a new building that the Common Pantry owns and has renovated and creates this great energy on the street. I look at that and I'm very proud of what I was able to do as board member for 20 years and board president, and then bringing in my commercial real estate expertise, if you will, to pull that together. That's one of the best projects I've ever worked on. It was time for me to, take a step off the board and do some other things, but even just, straight commercial projects I've been involved with. And excuse me, I bought the building, an old industrial building on the north side here, that's now the home to Half Acre Brewery, brewing facility and tap room. That was all a for profit transaction for me, but I feel great that every time I go there and have a beer in the beer garden with some friends, that I feel like, yeah, I was the one to be able to put this together, had the vision to buy it, to know it could be something else, and I love it. And I look at this building on Montrose. I look at Ravenswood Work Center as something that we bought from a nonprofit whose mission was to support local businesses and incubate small businesses. And it turns out that their model, was not able to take into account the crumbling concrete or water leaks. They didn't have the capital to do that, so they had to sell the building. Well, I bought it. When I bought it, people asked me, am I going to tear it down, get rid of all the tenants and build condos? I said, no, we want to keep all the tenants. We want to invest in the building and we want to make it a home for a lot of great local businesses. And we've turned it into even an office section that is more, instead of work from home, it's work near home. And it's this great energy, this great environment that, I feel like we created this really cool place. And, when I'm gone, hopefully that stays. Maybe I'll just sign longer and longer term leases. So whoever ends up with it after I'm gone, has to keep those tenants. But that's the kind of stuff that I like to do. And up in Evanston, the project there. And so you talk about, legacy or, long-term actions, long-term impact of actions we make today. And that's what I love. I love being able to do that. When I bought this land for this building on Montrose in Chicago, I actually did it because I said I need to rush and get something done eventually because I'm told I'm not going to be around. And I involved my 2 and 3 year old daughters at the time. Later they were 4 and 5. I involved them in the project for that reason. So they would know what we were doing and why we were doing it. We had this community garden. Why? We want to be part of the community. Why? We want to build housing that has a affordable housing component. Why? So yeah. So I like, making decisions today, getting involved in projects that will have a long-term impact. And I love, when they're profitable, you have the ability to put some of those profits back into things that are not, directly money making. And it's whether it's good design or a mural on the building or happy hours for the tenants or affordable housing, things like that. Again, I just feel great about it. I love doing, more and more of that. So yeah, I look around the neighborhood when I drive around on the north side of Chicago, and I like feeling that I was part of, a number of these things.
Okay. So, David, if a new developer came to you with drive but no direction, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I don't know. That happens a lot. I get, I do have a lot of time for people, and whether it's, people mentoring or coming for advice. And I always had that luxury of people willing to share their opinions with me as well. So, I try not to be too much of just giving advice because things that worked for me may not work for them. We're all different. We all have different motivations. I would say a developer getting a start, again, I'd go back to what I think is some of the mistakes made. Don't do just what the money wants and don't do a project just for you to make money. Find a way to do a meaningful project that will end up being profitable. And the other thing I would say is don't think you have to be too creative and in terms of financial structuring, because sometimes I think that will get people in trouble. But to make the numbers work, you start getting a little creative and then loose with the numbers. The other thing is just be honest with people. You don't always don't always have the facts to share with everybody when they ask you about a project, but don't make stuff up, don't lie, be honest. Tell people what you don't know when you don't know. If you don't have the answer, I think people appreciate that.
Right. What's one question every developer should ask themselves before they break ground on a new project?
Is this what's needed? If it is what I am building really meeting a need, for today and for the long term. And if you're just, this, so in our business, a lot of developers will build with the intent of selling, in the short term. And you could argue that you're only going to maximize your profits if you're building something good that then someone wants to buy in the future. But focusing just on the money and the capital markets and the profits on a deal, I think you end up getting a lot of bad things built. So, work with, people say, collaborate with people. When you go into a community meeting as a developer, don't go into these meetings, like is often done and tell the community what you need them to give you as a developer. Go to these meetings or before the meetings even and talk to the public officials or the nonprofits or the neighborhood organizations and ask them what they want. You'll get some crazy ideas, and everyone wants green space and wants a community center and nonprofits and stuff that will not make sense for a profitable real estate venture, but listen to them. Listen to what they want, listen to what they don't want, and maybe more importantly, why. And I think if you do that as a developer, then you understand the why behind their wants or dislikes. You'll understand how you can maybe come back with something that they that they really want. And, I remember these community meetings in Evanston that we had, and everyone talks about Evanston being a difficult municipality. I would go into meetings and, get hugs from the people in the city. We gave a community meeting, we got a standing ovation. I don't know if that's ever happened. Usually it's tomatoes being thrown. But the only thing we did differently was you know, we asked them what they wanted and why. At one city council meeting, we showed the design, and everybody gets the opportunity to stand up and speak. And there was this older woman that got up and had her 2 minutes of speaking, and she was worried about the birds, and everyone referred to her as the bird lady. And she said, I'm concerned about the migratory patterns of these birds, and when we build this big building, they're going to crash into the building, and it's going to impact the birds. And, I've seen other developers just say, well, thank you for your concern. And so I said, that's really bad. What can we do to make it better? And she was surprised and at the microphone, and she said, well, can you do less, reflective glass, or can you change the color, or whatever it is? And I looked over at my architect at the meeting, and I said, we can do that, right? He's like, yeah, sure. And she was flabbergasted, and she had time left. You listen to people, wonder why they want a certain problem. Some people are just against change, and you're never going to get through that. But people have legitimate concerns for their community or their neighborhood. And if you can help them get through that, or help them manage the change, or accept change, you can get some really great stuff done.
Amazing. So before we close out, if somebody from our listeners want to reach out to you, where they can reach out?
Where can they reach out? I give everybody my email and cell phone. Don't go to my website because it's about 15 years dated. I don't even have gray hair in that, I don't think. But so I've not updated that. But give me a call. 312-36782. This is not an infomercial, but I just love hearing from people about what they're doing, what they want to do. If there's anything that I've done that might be able to help somebody, but also there's stuff that they're doing and where they are that are going to help me understand what's going on. Email as well, dbrown@harrington-brown.com. Anytime, send me an email. I will do my best to be responsive. But I love connecting with people, and hope this is all helpful.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for being on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks for what you're doing to help us all get the word out. And everyone has a different approach, and I appreciate having this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much. So that's it. This is Real Talk, where we have real talk with the real people in real estate. See you next time.